everybody. This is Representative Carolyn Partridge at her home, my home in Wyndham, and we are, this is the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee. We're starting a little bit late and we apologize for that. We were on the floor of the House and just momentarily. And so we're going to be taking a look at H656, which, as many of you will remember, is our housekeeping bill, our miscellaneous housekeeping bill. And Mike O'Grady is going to be going through this with us, pointing out the changes that the Senate has made, because they've made a few. And Mike, we thank you as always for joining us.
I don't know what document you have.
I don't either, to be honest with you. Oh, there we go. Linda put something up there. It looks like it's draft number 3.3.
This is the section.
Excuse me?
Is
Mike,
that
can
the
you
draft you wanted?
I can't really tell what the document is. Is this the same proposal amendment?
Lord, hold on, you guys, I'm going to mute. You go ahead.
Linda, is this a Senate proposal of amendment?
Sorry, I have the section by section summary up, I think, but I can't quite tell. I'm sorry.
No, it's not the section by section summary. It's the
Oh, 3 point. Let's see. Sorry.
Sorry, gang. That was my neighbor asking me if I needed anything from the grocery store, which is so kind of her. Okay, so what are we working with here?
Is this?
I really don't know. I don't know what you want to work with.
I want to go through the changes in 656 that the Senate made.
Okay.
I mean, is that document on their website maybe?
I think this is it right here, but I don't know if this is actually public yet, but
Oh, okay. Would you
So-
rather that we not do it then, Mike? Can you give us?
I don't know what you want, so just tell me what you want and I will
Well,
do it.
I
I'm
wanted
feeling a little uninformed.
Oh, okay. I thought this was on our agenda. I just wanted folks to be prepared for the changes that the Senate might be making, with the hopes that we could potentially concur with what they've done. I talked to Bobby Starr this morning, and if I remember correctly, he told me that we could share the changes that have been made. But if you're doubting that, then because we talked about a number of things, and so I don't want to blow anybody's cover here.
I don't really know how to answer that.
Okay.
I'm sending you the section by section summary of the Senate amendment. Or I'm sending it to Linda.
Okay.
I don't know what Senator Starr said. Senator Starr said this morning in committee that he didn't want the amendment to be widely distributed. So.
Oh, okay. Then perhaps don't.
So I don't know what he said to you, and I don't know what's expected.
Okay. So let's not
communicating with me.
Let's not talk about that. Are there some other changes that they made that we should be aware of that maybe don't include this other piece?
I just sent Linda the section by section summary, and if she puts that up, we can walk through that.
Okay, that would be perfect. Thanks so much. John O'Brien, your hand is up. What would you like?
I just wondered where this R656 56 was at? Has it passed out of Senate Ag and passed their chamber and coming back to us, or is it somewhere in transit?
It's still in the Senate committee. They haven't voted on their amendment yet. They plan to do that tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we'll just wait for that section by section. And Mike, also, there was a request from, I think it was Senator Campion to make a change. Do you know what happened with that?
He proposed his amendment this morning. I don't think they officially voted on it. I would say there was some resistance from the committee.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, here we go.
So the first thing they are proposing to change is to make some minor changes to the feral pig language that the agency requested. As you may remember, there's 3 ways to determine what is a feral pig. One of the ways is to have testing conducted to identify whether it is the genetic feral pig. The language is passed by the House said the testing had to be conducted by the National Wildlife Research Center. The agency says, well, let's take that out because in the future, the testing could be available from other sources and potentially cheaper. So they would like to have that alternative in the future. So the requirement to have the National Wildlife Research Center test would be taken out.
Would it be completely taken out, Mike, or is that where the shall turn to a may?
No, that's not the same language.
Okay.
So in addition, there is a provision that allows an owner of an escaped domestic pig to request the Agency of Agriculture's assistance in capturing the animal. This is where the Senate committee has changed shall to may.
Okay.
When they originally introduced the language, it said the agency shall assist an owner that requests assistance, but the agency wanted that to be may, that an owner may request the agency's assistance and the agency may provide it effectively. So that change has been made. And then the third feral pig language change was that you may remember that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is required to notify the Agency of Agriculture before killing a feral swine, but that would require them to notify the Agency of Ag if it was truly a feral swine, if it was not just an escaped domestic pig, but a razorback or a wild boar, etc. And the department wants the ability to take that type of pig without notifying the Agency of Agriculture. So the language was clarified that notification is only required prior to the department taking an escaped domestic pig.
Okay.
And then there was also a requirement that in the House passed version that in determining whether or not a swine population could establish a breeding population, that the Department of Fish and Wildlife needed to consult with USDA. And they don't really think they need to consult with USDA. They think they have the expertise to do that themselves. So that requirement would be struck.
Okay.
The second instance of amendment adds 5 new sections to the bill. The first is an appropriation of $192,000 to VHCB to provide business, financial, and mental health assistance to farm and food businesses that suffered losses or expenses due to COVID-19. The second new section, section 29, would amend VHCB's authority to provide that it shall have the powers of a nonprofit corporation. This allows VHCB to more readily access federal and other funds available to nonprofit corporations. Section 30 repeals the sunset on the READY program, the Rural Economic Development Initiative. Section 31 is probably the biggest change to the or proposed change. This would establish or require the Department of Financial Regulation to do an assessment of milk pricing in Vermont and its effect on the sustainability of Vermont's dairy industry, and would recommend and require them to recommend any revisions to the dairy pricing in the state to improve the future viability of dairy farming. And after receipt of the report, the Committee on Committees and the Speaker of the House would establish a task force consisting of legislators and other experts to develop legislation to implement DFR's recommendations. And then the next section was just added this morning, which the committee has not even yet approved, would require the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Recreation to testify to the legislature regarding the status of forest carbon sequestration programs and projects in the state. And then the effective date, there are several sections that go into effect on passage, such as the local food definition, ecosystems services working group, the hemp growing season, the READY, sunset repeal, and the DFR milk pricing report. All the other sections take effect July 1, 2020.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Questions for Mike on this changes? John O'Brien's hand is up. John, and then Tom.
Just a couple, Mike. One on the feral pig thing, when it says that clause about the notification of taking of a, I guess, escaped domestic pig. What happens in the case of, say, Corbin Park, where it's an escaped, I don't know what they classify it there, but an escaped, say, feral pig. It's not like in Georgia or Texas where they're just running around being feral, but they're actually owned by somebody.
So I think that would I don't think that's a domestic animal, first of all.
Yeah.
And so I would say it wouldn't fall under the criteria of as a domestic pig that's outside their enclosure. I don't know if New Hampshire has an import requirement for Eurasian boar or Russian boar or razorbacks, but I expect they do. So anything at that facility that escaped in Vermont would be wild and would be subject to taking by the department without notice.
Okay, great. The other question was just, what's our jurisdiction? This is a miscellaneous ag bill, and so why are we covering the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Rec reporting on ecosystem services in this bill?
Well, your committee has jurisdiction over forestry issues.
Yep.
And the Senate committee has similar, well, it's not really specified in their rules, but they exercise similar authority. This really derives from a provision in one of the agricultural development bills last year that directed the creation of a forest carbon sequestration working group.
Yeah.
And this is really just to maintain some touch back with the legislature about what is going on with forest carbon sequestration.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Tom, and then Vicky, and then John Bartholomew. You got to unmute yourself, Tom.
Michael, I think it's section 31 that is asking the Department of Financial Regulation to look in the, I couldn't see the end of the sentence, in the the sustainability of the dairy industry. Is that what they're looking into, or just the milk pricing and how it works? What exactly are they looking into?
They are basically looking at the milk pricing system as implemented through dairy cooperatives and whether or not that is a sustainable mechanism to maintain dairy farming in the state in the future.
Are they the appropriate group for that? I have to ask that.
The Department's Financial Regulation specific authority right now doesn't address milk producers, but their general authority is about regulating the services and pricing that are provided by certain industries. And the committee checked with Commissioner Piaczek to see if the commissioner thought this was in the department's ability and whether or not they wanted to do this. And they said that they are up for the task. The language gives the Commissioner of Financial Regulation some directive and authority to access data from the Agency of Agriculture or from the Milk Commission regarding the production of milk to better inform an analysis. But the Senate committee believes that DFR is more appropriate to do this type of analysis because it's what they do for insurers and banking and entities of that kind. And so that's why it's DFR.
And then the speaker will appoint a board to come up with policy based on their recommendations. Is that correct?
To develop the legislation, yes. So the speaker and the committee on committees already has authority to create joint task force working groups under your joint rules. This is really just reflecting that authority and asking that additional experts be placed on that task force as well.
Okay.
All right, Vicky, you're up. Tom, you want to lower your hand, please?
Thank you, Carolyn. Mike, you look different. I think you got a haircut.
I did.
I hadn't even
Anyway.
noticed.
It looks great. So
Thank
my
you.
question's a follow-up on Tom's. I was actually also curious about this task force, and I'm not sure what you said. I have to really get down and read it. But did you say the task force is also studying the viability of dairy farming in Vermont? In other words, the future of it? Is that part of this task force duty, or elaborate on that for me?
So they're really looking at whether the existing pricing system will sustain the dairy farming industry going into the future, and recommend whether or not there should be changes, including changes to the pricing system in order to sustain the dairy industry. It's really about whether or not that federal market order and how pricing is provided would support dairy farming going into the future. And then DFR makes its recommendations, and then the task force develops legislation to implement those recommendations.
That sounds like a pretty heavy lift. So I need to mull that whole idea over, but thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, next is John Bartholomew and then Terry Norris.
I just
John?
wanted to comment on this. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on this section about the forest carbon sequestration. It just strikes me as odd that we would put it in statute that they need to provide that update when, if we wanted them to an update, normally we would just ask them. So it just seems kind of odd. Like,
Well, it's not in statute, it's session law. and the commissioner said he would prefer it to be written down so that he has that that official obligation to continue to report back to the legislature about carbon sequestration's activities in the state. He said that this morning. He asked and said he appreciated that it would be in the bill.
Okay, that's good to know. Anything else,
So you're
John?
saying he did ask for that? Okay, yeah, great.
Okay.
No, that's,
Okay, Terry.
I have some questions about the federal milk pricing, but I'll wait and try to figure them out. I don't think that there's any way the state is going to control the federal order, but
Well,
I guess if they want to look into it. Yeah, go ahead.
the Vermont Milk Commission actually has its own authority to establish orders and premiums on milk that's sold within the state. So one of the concepts is because much of milk, or not as much milk, is being exported, and it may even further decline with the Hood processing plants closing, that the state has more authority to establish its own pricing order, and could probably work under that order more effectively and economically successfully than underneath the federal order. Other states have established premiums, Pennsylvania as an example, and so it would be a question of, do you go to a new order? Do you go to a premium? Do you go to some sort of enhanced pricing system that will more effectively support Vermont dairy?
Okay. Another question. I need to ask this because my wife is the president of the fair, but did the Senate try to do something to fix the issue with the septic system at the fair? And since we were intended to make it right last year, and it just snowballed into a massive problem with the fair not even be able to operate this year, and they're going to be required to do a full mound system next year. Every time they do a permit, they add more to it. So if there's any way to fix that, to make it like we thought it was supposed to be last year, I would be impelled to try to do that.
The Agency of Natural Resources.
My wife is sitting outside the door, so I have to ask that.
The Agency of Natural Resources sent an email saying several things, saying that the permit issued last year had as a term of condition that there would be monitoring done to determine what the appropriate flow should be. I think the email said that the ANR has not yet received that data. So they can't even begin to issue a permanent permit. In addition, they said that they believe a holding tank might not be appropriate considering the frequency and cost of pumping at the fair. They are willing to provide financing under the Clean Water Revolving Fund. They are willing to accept the financial surety that the fair has proposed, even though it's not something that they normally would accept. But at this time, the remaining issues include confirming, finalizing the actual flows from the monitoring performed last year, providing a final design for the system that is in place planned to be installed, providing a final design for the water supply, and then resolving that final financial surety requirement. They say that they have not received any of that information from the fair, and they can't go forward with anything until they receive that information, provided that they said that they're willing to not hold the fair to that for another year. So that's what I have. And that's what the Senate committee heard.
Okay, I'll pass that on. I hate to get my wife
I can send you this.
hot and bothered, but that will light a fire under her because they have been so difficult to deal with. I'll stop right there.
I think that they might have a similar opinion about the fair.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions for Mike at this moment? Terry, your hand is still up, or do you have another question? Okay. So Mike, is there another amendment that another part of this that might be coming along that is not public yet?
No, that was the carbon sequestration language
Okay.
that they were supposed to look at overnight and approve tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about 656? All right. I'm not seeing any hands. So then the other thing that was on our agenda was the, oh, and now I've lost my agenda.
Yes, 351.
Yes, 351, which is the financial relief assistance to the ag community. And just to sort of recap, we passed on to APROPS our recommendation regarding that, and we included $50 million, knowing that we would probably not be able to get that amount of money. In a conversation with a speaker, I was made aware that it would probably just be one tier, and so tier 1 and tier 2 would be combined for a total of $30 million. And when I testified in front of APROPS, whatever day that was, can't remember whether it was yesterday or the day before. I guess it's the day before, Mike. I was asked, what about that 20 million? And I said, well, that was up to the appropriations committee to work their magic as they have in the past and to try and find it, but that we would await their decision. So we're trying to find a way to reach some kind of an agreement between actually the Senate's position and our position. We've been made aware of the fact that there is this plan that we passed, I believe it was yesterday, for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, that I believe has $70 million in it. We are aware of the fact that small or diversified farms, as well as loggers, will be able to apply for that money. We are also aware that the Appropriations Committee, or at least I'm aware of the fact that the Appropriations Committee is talking about $5 million to go to working lands, which I think a portion of that may be earmarked for COVID relief type of efforts. I might be wrong about that. And Mike, if you know, feel free to jump in and correct me. And then they are also working on an additional $80 million package. I don't know all the details of it, but I believe that that may also be an opportunity for small diversified farms and potentially loggers to apply. My understanding also is that there are some folks on appropriations who are working on a special package for the forest products sector. And I don't know how much of that has been made public at this point, but there was a question, there have been a number of questions about why we haven't done anything for loggers and for forestry sector. And quite frankly, it was because there was never really a proposal made that we could work with. So I'm really happy that they are working on this and that they're finding this potentially this money. I believe it's in the neighborhood of $5 million. So that's kind of where we're at. And Mike, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this, all the machinations that are going on at this point?
Not really. I'm supposed to be drafting some of that, but I don't really have enough information to do any of it. I'm trying my best, and I'm supposed to be in that committee in a half an hour with language, and I don't know if I will or not.
That's appropriations you're supposed to be in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe we should cut this short so that Mike can get busy on that language. Are there any other questions from any committee members about that, the financial assistance for dairy? I'm not seeing any hands. Sharon.
So what I'm hearing is that you presented to appropriations and that we clearly have some pretty big differences between our proposal and the Senate's vision of how to move forward. So we're just in limbo right now, waiting.
I think that there's going to be a discussion between me and Senator Starr about how we might be able to move forward on this. And I might have a little more to report to you when we meet on Friday.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Tom's hand is up. Tom, got to unmute yourself.
Carolyn, I know no one really knows, but is there any indication that there's going to be a second round of funding that dairy could participate in?
I asked the speaker that, and it's hard to tell because it would have to be coming from the federal government, but there is a sense that there might be.
Okay.
But there are no guarantees.
Okay, I understand.
All right. Any other questions? John O'Brien.
So at the moment, House Appropes has both our our committee bill, I get our CRF committee bill, and the Senate CRF bill.
I'm not sure. Mike, do you know if they've got the?
They have 351.
Okay, great.
So how do they try to work that out?
I think probably 351 is probably the best vehicle right now because it's already passed one body. So if the two bodies can reach an agreement, and that would then be added as a strike all amendment to 351, pass the House and to send it back to the Senate for confirmation. That would probably be the quickest thing to do.
So we would never even take possession of that bill.
That's really the speaker's discretion of who, once it's originally assigned, it then becomes a question if the speaker is going to allow it to go to another committee, or if someone's going to move for it to be committed to another committee.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Tom, your hand is up still. Did you just, yeah, there you go.
No, it is up.
Responded.
It is.
Oh, do you have another question?
It's regarding the housekeeping bill. I just had a thought, if I might.
Okay,
Could we take some, I know it's hard, and you know, that's one of the advantages of having the committee room and not Zoom, but I wouldn't mind hearing some testimony on that section 31 from processors possibly, and maybe some farmers. I hate calling those farmers, and again, we call them in every other week, but maybe processors about that proposal.
and can you remind me of what section 31 was, Tom?
That's the section that's, I think it's 31, isn't it, Michael, that talks about the determination of milk pricing and its viability in the future of Vermont dairy.
Yep, the DFR report.
Oh, okay. Well, we possibly could, but I think from what I understand, it's really just a study, a report to talk about the feasibility of it. And yeah, I think it's a little down the road. I mean, I don't have an objection to taking some testimony, but I'm not sure that it makes sense right at this moment.
So the report is due January 15th, and after the report is received by the General Assembly, then the Speaker and the Committee on Committees would form the task force. So conceivably, the task force could be formed in January of 2021.
Yeah. So I think it might make sense just to hold off until that moves forward. And then we have something to really sink our teeth into.
Okay. But if policy is going to be formulated, I mean, I wouldn't mind stakeholders knowing about it ahead of time. Don't you think that's appropriate, that the processors and dairy farmers should hear about it if they're looking into that sustainability of pricing and dairy? I think they should know a little bit about it. Maybe they do, but I think they should know about it. And they may have their opinions, and more importantly, they may have opinions for us.
Okay. All right. I see that Sharon has to leave us. See you, Sharon. And so, Mike, did they take testimony from folks who might be interested in this?
They've taken testimony throughout, and maybe not that much testimony, but they've had a lot of discussion about looking at the milk pricing system. It's something that Senator Starr has indicated he wants to do from almost the first week of the session. But I don't know specifically if they took testimony on it. I mean, they've heard from the cooperatives here and there. Senator Starr usually always brings it up. But nothing specifically that I can recall about the DFR assessment.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that presentation we had from Roger Albee and Dan Smith about milk pricing and a general overview picture. So I've certainly been aware that Bobby wanted to do something about this, and I don't know that you know, at this point, it makes sense to take testimony, but we can discuss it. We can discuss it a little bit more, Tom.
Okay.
All right, any other question? Oh, John Bartholomew's hand is up. John,
I was just going to add that generally it makes sense and we want to be as thorough as possible when we get legislation through. But the clock is ticking. I think the speaker has a really clear plan of getting things wrapped up so that we go on basically a summer break, which is unprecedented. So I'm kind of feeling like unless we really have to have the testimony to get a good answer, that we should probably try to keep things moving as quickly as we can.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. All right, any other questions? All right, I'm seeing no hands. So why don't we break here? That'll give Mike a chance to get maybe his work done for approps. And we're going to be back on the floor, I think at 2. So this will give you all a chance to grab some lunch. So why don't we wrap it up here, and we'll be back on Friday at 8:30 in the morning. And we'll see you all then.